and welcome to the Excellence Foresight podcast, the podcast where we explore the mindset, models, and strategies that fuel sustainable excellence in organizations. I'm your host, Nancy Noemi, and today we're diving into a unique area which we are talking about for the first time in our Excellence Foresight podcast, which is project management offices, with this episode on creating impact, a conversation on PMO structure and strategy. I'm thrilled to have with me here today Dr. Robert Joslin, founder of Association of International Project Management Officers, AIPMO. Dr. Robert is a researcher and a consultant who's on a mission to bridge the gap between academic theory and real-world project management. Dr. Robert and I first crossed paths in a unique setup on NEOM, the mega project in Saudi Arabia. Dr. Robert, welcome. I'm so pleased to have you here today.
Thank you for inviting me to your podcast, Nancy.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to have you. So let's start with the spark. My first question, what inspired you to create AIPMO?
So I guess you could actually describe it as frustration. Having worked in projects since I was very young, in fact, my father had his electronic workshop and I worked at the age of 7 on all the instruments. We built electronic counters and I used all the different machines. I knew what it meant about actually working on projects and delivering on time. And the difference between when I was a child and now is then if you get something wrong, it's not like getting things fixed with a FedEx and delivering it. It took far longer to actually deliver equipment. And so throughout the whole of my life till now, I've always worked on projects and worked on projects with people that have been absolutely amazing. We get it right first time. Being an engineer, we like building things. And the worst thing is when things go wrong. And I mentioned the word frustration, and this is because the failure rates on projects are so high or persistent that I wanted to actually find a way in which we can actually drive excellence, increase project success. And really, this is a role that PMO takes or should be taking in increasing project success results. That's really the reason why I actually decided to set up AIPMO to increase project success through PMOs.
I think this is a great story, and I'm pleased to see that you mentioned drive excellence and PMOs, and I think any part of the organization needs to focus on excellence to drive better results. So if I want to go back a little bit to the research, and in one sentence, I ask you to describe the gap that you are trying to close between research and the corporate world. So we have a lot of theory out there, and I think AIPMO is based on a lot of research. So how would you describe that gap? What are you trying to achieve through AIPMO?
Before I did my PhD, I actually had, near the time when I was thinking about it, more questions than answers. I actually felt companies were doing things that were counterproductive. And so if you asked me this question before, I would struggle probably to answer it and maybe say that, well, is the academic side, is it really actually providing value? But having been through now 40 years of a chartered engineer in electronics and engineering, and actually having done my PhD, what I'd like to try to do is close the gap between knowing what to do based on the knowledge that exists in research, which there's literally thousands of papers. It's a very rigorous approach of doing it, putting these things together so they actually mean something, and actually then making sure that what is actually taught is used in the project world. So taking the wealth of knowledge and actually structuring in such a way that you can actually apply it, and then you see the results.
That's a unique perspective. I think it's good to have this bridge between the theory and the practice, and make sure that organizations have what they need to implement the knowledge that is out there. So, what would you say is the unique thing that differentiates AIPMO from other organizations that focus on project management and project management offices?
Yeah, I think if you actually want to compare things, you need direct experience. So in fact, I'm probably one of the few people in the world that have actually worked for the different or volunteered for the different project management organizations. So my first one, I joined the CCTA, the Central Computer and Telecommunications Agency, in 1984 after I did my degree in electronics and engineering. And this is where we were working on standards and benchmarking. And in fact, we worked on the predecessor for Prince 2, which was Prompt 2. I volunteered for PMI for their portfolio standard. In fact, I worked with a colleague of mine. We developed the portfolio lifecycle, the first one, which is an edition 4. And then I've also, my PhDs on methodologies. And I've designed all the frameworks and methodologies for AIPMO. And part of my PhD was also looking at other types of frameworks, for example, the competence baseline. So you see actually how organizations do things, what is the strengths and the weaknesses. And I think the difference is that the world we actually work in is very complex, extremely complex.
Extremely.
It's not, and therefore, um, we've taken a philosophy in AIPMO. We have this motto, ab intus fundamentus. It means Latin for rebuilding from the foundations. So when you're looking at a problem, we need to actually break it from first principles. Hence, we have written 2 books on principles. We use frameworks, and then using a systems engineering approach, how things fit together. Just like a building, you always build the design, the framework of the building, you then put the services inside. And it's the same thing as well with the world that we live in the project program portfolio management, within PMOs, operational excellence, is how does everything fit together? You've got to define the pieces, look at the rules, work by principles, and then fit it together. So this is actually what we do is that's what makes us different, is that we actually design for the big picture, but every piece and all the framework building rules we have defined and use help us to actually create not seamless, but almost seamless between the different structures. So that's what makes us different, is that we look at the big picture, frameworks and principles and design principles in how we build our standards and our documentation.
Well, it's very interesting. And if we look at the world of frameworks where you work in, how would you describe the evolution of PMOs across the past decade? Because there was a lot of frameworks, a lot of changes, and I know now there's a recent also guideline that's out on PMOs. So how would you describe in one word the evolution of PMOs?
Understanding, how to understand things. When I think back, I actually worked in a PMO. I think it was in the 1980s. Then in the defense industry, I've worked in telecommunications. We had the most amazing PMO. It was actually for the Swiss Stock Exchange, one of the first electronic exchanges in the world. Very high quality PMO. And then with the advent of all the computers, and then different people with different, not so much on the guidance. For us, for myself personally, is that especially in the last 3 years, that we understand far more now through the research we've actually done, through the PhD programs, etc., than we did just 5 years ago. So the evolution is understanding. That's the
That's a
single
very
word.
it's a very interesting word. And if I look at, for example, when but like I'm doing my PhD now, and if you look at the new knowledge, we're trying to generate new knowledge to understand more about how things work. When we come from corporate background, we come from the practice. We want to solve out problems and come up with solutions for problems. So what is the misconception that companies still have about academic research now, which is maybe is hindering that, creating that bridge between the practice and the academia?
Well, unfortunately, I was in this category as well when I was younger. And that is, it's not practical. Research is not practical. I think I know everything. And that's the problem, is that when you start to get more experienced, you realize there's a lot more. The more you know, the more you don't know. The problem is there's people that what they don't know does not exist. And therefore, the academic side, it's some sort of mystical box. And this is what I've heard described by some people that describe about research. But this is not the case. It actually is practical, but you need to know how to apply it. Like with everything, is that you look at the research that's been done, whether it's on stakeholder management or it's on scheduling, for example. There's lots of different approaches. You need to really understand these approaches and see what's applicable for any given application. It also gives a confirmation of what you're doing or what you're trying to do, whether it actually makes sense or not. So it's taking the wealth of knowledge, seeing what actually makes sense and applying it to your environment. And it should give a confirmation that what you're actually doing is the right way of doing something.
So what is the real gap? Because sometimes we see when we try to apply pure knowledge into the business world and the corporate world, we see that sometimes it's not really applied in the right way. Could be
Mm-hmm.
just a translation, which is the problem. Maybe translation of the meanings, translation of what that knowledge is and what needs to be done. Or is it something else? Because we still see that problem between, I mean, that bridge is lacking between the academia and the real world, the real application. So what could we do for that?
It takes time. You got to learn to walk before you run. Um, I think that's an important motto. So when we look at the old days, you have to learn all the procedures, all the processes. In fact, we have the Swiss watch industry. In fact, here's a watch I have, a Victorinox watch. It's actually just across from where
It's
I
a
live
beautiful one.
on the mountain. So in fact, I live in the canton of the Swiss Army knife. The problem is that people don't want to learn. In fact, we teach the majority of the top 4 consulting companies plus other ones. And what I've noticed with the consultants is that they don't want to know the theory. They just want to know how to go and do it. The problem is it's just a series of steps. Anybody can go and do that. The more experienced guys actually want to have the understanding of why things happen. And therefore they can actually then see a situation and what to apply and what not to. I think this thing about getting a result today, it takes away from people's willingness to spend time to understand things. In fact, I have an expression is that, I feel very frustrated now, is that I say, I don't have the time to think. You have to think, you have to learn and see what the different options are. And then you can actually apply a solution based on good judgment.
I totally agree with you. And I'm going back to like maybe in November when I started my PhD, I felt overwhelmed with all the things, the new things that we need to learn, I think, to be able to move forward, a new way of thinking about new things and having that inquisitive, I think, mind for new knowledge somehow and finding out new topics to work on. So I totally agree on what you're saying.
Well, you raised an interesting thing about the inquisitive mind. So when you actually teach somebody or in a class, the people that sit at the front do much better than the people at the back. The people with cameras on the courses with the camera on does much better than the people that don't have the cameras on. The people that ask the questions, in fact, this is Voltaire, he's a philosopher a couple hundred
French,
years ago, judge a man by his questions than by his answers. I know I have a few people over the years that ask amazing questions. I mean, ones that I know it's a question myself, but there's only a very few handful in one hand out of teaching hundreds of people. And I think these are the people that think and contemplate because they ask the questions. And I say the same to my children. I say the same to the people in the company, the people I'm involved with. Always ask questions because then I know that you're thinking about things and you want to get an answer to this. And that's a very good basis of starting on your path of understanding.
So let me ask you this question. What's the most surprising insight you've uncovered through your research by having this inquisitive mind?
What's the most surprising insight?
Yeah, something that was my eureka moment.
I think what surprised me about the research on the PMO side is that, and this is perhaps a bit of a disappointment, and is the researchers only look what exists today. Invariably, they look at what happens within the associations, the project management associations, but there's little to nothing about future or undiscovered, for example, PMO models, or it's more current looking and past than future. And in fact, this reflects into the standards. I remember when I was working or volunteering for an American project management organization, they spoke about lagging standards rather than leading standards, and I actually didn't know what the term meant. Lagging is more looking from the past, and leading is looking for the future. And then I defined the terms myself, and I use that. And in fact, everything we do is to look for the future. And I have this expression that if you have an industry that's in a mess and you standardize the mess, you keep it in a mess. What we want to do is look at innovation as part of an association, seeing what the best organizations do. And you can only do that through big distributions and surveys of 300 people or 300 companies. We can see what the top ones are doing. We then put those pieces into the framework and test it in case studies, courses, etc. And that's what we write about. And that's why it takes us 4, 5, 6 years to actually look at the research and building into the books. But because it's structured properly, there's very little that needs to change. You don't need a revolution. You just more need an evolution because it's well thought out in the first place. So that's my biggest surprise is the majority of research that's done is actually understanding about the current rather than actually looking into the future, especially models and designs and things like that.
I think you've already touched or gave us part of the answer to my question. So how do you ensure AIPMO's frameworks are grounded, but also forward-looking? What are you working now currently for that forward-looking aspect of research?
Okay, so the forward-looking part, if you're looking at the frameworks themselves, they don't necessarily look forward, but they actually have all the pieces you actually need. When you're looking at the models, a model reflects, it's a reflection of something that exists. The two go together. So in fact, the frameworks we develop are hybrids, the hybrids between frameworks and models. That gives you a basis of understanding. The forward-looking is how you interpret those frameworks and how you see different perspectives to a particular problem. So you probably noticed that when you have people around the table, they're discussing a problem, often they're discussing cross purposes to each other. The person that holds the pen controls the meeting. And I remember when I was 20 years old, there was this guy that could just draw something up like this, and suddenly it made sense to people. He was drawing a framework, and that always impressed on me how he brought the meeting into order for people with having a common understanding. And then from that point, you can build upon it. So the forward-looking part of the frameworks is actually having them that they have rules. We use this concept called MISI, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. We have nested frameworks. We have a number of other techniques now. We build it so that people understand, and then we can then start to move forward. So it's more having it and then using it as a basis to understand the future. And we've got various games that we play, or we've got various frameworks like strategy under uncertainty frameworks, other ones that help us go into the future as well.
Oh, that's very interesting. And today is about the PMO, and I want to touch a little bit on the specifically on the PMO, the project management offices. And in the work you're doing, I think we talk a lot and we've had a lot of discussions together about the value the organization are getting from the PMO and what the PMO can still give in different contexts and under different, I think, governance. So in your opinion, what role should a PMO play in an organization excellence journey? I'm talking about excellence being here from an excellence background, because everything that any unit in the organization is doing should lead towards better performance. It should be able to help the organization achieve strategic objectives. So how can you describe the PMO in this context? Is it really leading or helping organizations to achieve excellence?
To lead an organization to be excellent, you need to be excellent yourself. And I remember when I worked for this group for an organization, we just call ourselves a center of excellence and just change the name. Doesn't mean you're excellent. So you really do need to benchmark yourself in being excellent. That's one thing. The second thing about PMOs is people talk about just PMO, project management office. We know that teamwork is important. Nobody challenges that. And so for PMOs to drive excellence, you have to drive it as a team of PMOs. And each PMO plays a different role. And the thing is, the role is actually shown through the services they go on build. So you can actually look at the roles by its services. So the challenge is for the PMOs, they need to be very careful when they're looking at driving excellence. And this is actually maybe a slightly another topic, is that PMOs are all set up to do compliance and assurance, but now they shift towards more operational focus. So yes, okay, the doing of the work and the checking of the work, there's an issue there. But if you're looking at excellence in both areas, as long as they can manage this potential conflict, they can look at driving it from different perspectives of excellence. So both like for example, the Deming cycle, the plan, do, check, act, looking at excellence in the sense of methodologies, in coaching, for example, in mentoring, and in fact, the most successful PMOs have people in with at least 7 years experience in program management. They're the more senior people in there. So it's not the junior people in PMOs, it's more the senior people. And they're the ones that know what excellence is. They breathe it, smell it, lived it. And they can also then, through the role of the PMO, help to percolate it through the organization.
So what I understand from you is that having mature or people who are seasoned and PMO officers who have like more than 7 years of experience would help the PMO mature. So what does it really take for the PMO to mature? What are the things that they need to focus on or build, the capabilities that they need to build to get into a certain level of maturity?
Yeah, well,
In
actually,
addition to people.
to people, yeah. So PMOs don't actually mature, they actually evolve and adapt. And in fact, it's not really a word that's used in the PMOs, and you'll see this in the research papers. With projects, it's about repeatability, PMOs about adaptability. So yes, there is an element of maturity in the sense of being really good at what they go and do, And so the question you asked was about, actually, can you repeat the question, if that's okay?
I'm asking, is it enough for them to have seasoned PMOs to be able to get to a certain level of effectiveness maturity? If not, what are the other things that they need to get, that are the capabilities that they need to build to be able to evolve? And I agree with you, they need to evolve, definitely. And it's not just about maturity, but what are the things, the prerequisites that they need to get there?
Okay, the prerequisites. So things like having the authority, so like the mandate. So in that way that they're not just doing something in their spare time. Having the capability in the sense of the governance that's around that allows them to actually execute something, knowing what the role is or the services they're providing, because PMOs without any services actually aren't doing anything. Each PMO, as I say, plays a particular role or has a particular function in the organization, how they actually work together as a team. Looking at PMOs all about transparency. Departments don't like transparency. So political skills, for example, high emotional intelligence, that's one of the differences of somebody very good in PMO versus project management. Project managements get the job done. In the PMO, you need to get on with people and understand what is happening. Those are some examples of the capabilities that they would need to have to operate and have a long life in the organization, but not, they say, mature, but always making sure they're optimally tuned, if that's right, or structured, because organizations change, PMOs need to change as well as a reflection, so they can achieve their maximum potential in that organization.
They need to adjust to the needs of the organization and evolve with the needs of the organization. Exactly. I think that's and then if I look back to the excellence models, I think excellence models also focus on leadership results, continuous improvement. You mentioned the PDCA cycle. So we see naturally the PMOs fitting in this picture, but still they don't necessarily provide that value. And I like your examples about the Center of Excellence. We give them this name, but they're not necessarily operating as such. So I think there's still a lot of work that the PMOs needs to do, I think, to evolve to that level of, I would say maybe maturity still. I know you mentioned that they don't mature, they evolve, but they need to have certain level of effectiveness and maturity to be able to provide value. So if we look a little bit at the future of PMOs and the impact they have, so we often speak about PMOs having impact. In your view, what defines a high impact PMO now in 2025 and in the future? What would that high impact PMO look like?
So this it's a very interesting question about maturity and impact. So these are the sort of two terms. Another term for impact is value. You can sort of translate it. English is a very loose language, and that's why definitions are very important. So if you're looking, there was an understanding that higher the maturity equals higher impact, but that's not necessarily the case, and you may not want that. So, for example, with a PMO, is that if there's one that's set up to address a crisis, it may not be mature in the sense of all the documentation, but it's got to sort the problem out so that it has a high impact when it solves it. Or you may have actually a low impact and low maturity. So a new PMO, for example, that's a legitimate quadrant to go and be in. Or it could be a PMO as low maturity and low impact because it's poorly designed. That's not a legitimate quadrant to be in that example. Or you may have high maturity, low impact. That's typically of a compliance PMO that really does compliance and assurance, but does nothing else. And for the majority, they should be in high impact, high maturity. So what do we mean by impact? One of the challenges you have wherever we work in is categorization. So this is structuring information. And so you'll have seen the different types of categories of PMOs from different groups. The simplest way of actually looking at PMOs is actually looking at delivery and non-delivery PMOs. So a delivery PMO is actually one that's involved with projects. And I mentioned there's like a bit of a conflict of interest between the assurance and compliance and delivery, but that's what they do, or some of them do today. There's also the ones that don't deliver. So these are the center of excellences, or the ones that do compliance and assurance. They set the standards, etc., and they feed them into the project teams. So when you're looking at impact, the ones that are involved or responsible for projects, you can actually look at the success criteria of the projects, take a sample. So really, how successful are they in the projects meeting their success criteria, the measures of success? But some of those PMOs will also be doing aspects that don't deliver into projects, but do non-delivery. And this is where you actually look at the service levels and the agreements within that. In that way, you can actually measure a combination of both to determine the actual impact they're making. So it's actually a separate measure to what is looked at just from maturity alone.
That's very interesting, I think, approach. And if we look at the PMO's role now, like 5 years from now, where do you see the biggest shift in their roles? You mentioned the structured delivery, non-delivery PMOs. Would you think we'll still have more delivery, non-delivery PMOs? Will this differ based on the geography, based on the region where the PMOs are or the industry?
Yeah, if I elevate it higher than that, I would say we talked about adapting. So the ability to say anticipate change, adapt,
Yeah.
either dynamically, the influence strategic decisions or decisions that are lower down. In PMOs, on the impact side, they don't just manage, they shape outcomes. And I think that's it. Wherever the PMOs are placed, they need to adapt. The impact decisions, strategic or operational decisions, and they shape outcomes. I think that's what you see in the future. And I didn't talk about whether the delivery, non-delivery, but that should be common across all of them.
So there's no real patterns, I think, right? They need to adapt to what is the need, what they need to be doing in the future to remain relevant. So Robert, if I ask you, you work with a lot of young PMO leaders and PhD students. What advice would you give to a young PMO leader who wants to stay relevant? And we see a lot of examples, right? People ask for support because they're not able to demonstrate that relevance anymore. So what is the advice you would give them?
Before I answer that question, just let me finish off on the previous one. I remember one of the groups I was teaching, the PMO was actually managing air conditioning systems. And people were saying, oh, that's not what they go and do. And I thought about it and I thought, well, if you have a PMO that's high performing, they're the go-to people to get things done and manage it. As a CEO myself, and I've run a couple of companies before, is that I give the project or the problem to people that get it fixed. Do I care if they're called PMO or the finance department? No, I don't. I just give it to the guys that I know that can manage it. And in fact, this group managed it very well, and they then passed it on to in the air conditioning systems to manage to somebody else. So I think that's what's important is if you are successful, you'll always get more work. People that are busy will always get more work. I mean, making impact. The ones that don't achieve anything, they'll just be doing operations. They will be doing really sort of paper stuff until the cut comes along and they'll be going. So this is the thing about adaptability and actually showing success. People will come to you for the projects. Success breeds success. So to your question about staying relevant, this is a very interesting question about the future of PMOs, and there's lots of discussions. We had some webinars on it. Now, I was remembering back when you look at, if you say, take the Industrial Revolution, when machines came along, they took out the need for muscle because of machines and power. Now, with artificial intelligence, it takes away the need for intelligence. And if you get robotics, it's intelligence on the move. In fact, I remember writing a paper or presentation back in 2012 called Walk-in Risks, robots that you can reprogram as a workforce. One day is doing claims, and other days maybe on a manufacturing plant. So then I have actually done using ChatGPT. I asked it, what can you do in project management and PMOs? What roles can you take over? And I did quite extensive research. In fact, the majority of the work that we do in the project world, as well as other professions, except for maybe nursing and there was more the sort of healthcare, they were saying actually we can do like 60 to 70% of it. So what I would recommend for the young professionals is to really make sure you understand about data. So you need to have the high emotional intelligence. You need to get on with very senior people. That's important, but you need to understand the data, how you bring it together. And in fact, this was one of the things that we did when Nancy talked about the organization, the mega project we worked at, bringing data together, the interpretation of that, making sure that decisions are taken on time. And of course, it will be supported by AI, but it's going to take several years to get into the transition where AI really does the majority of things that we do. So make sure you're at the head of the curve in actually redefining your PMO or PMOs in the organization and putting all those building blocks into place. Otherwise, what you'll find is that some other group, outsourced group, will actually make an offer, and then you'll find that your administrative PMO no longer exists. It's been outsourced and then removed, and then the higher value added services are actually going to be then replaced from what you're doing. Always get ahead of the curve, don't be behind it.
I like your analysis on this, and I think one thing came to my mind is that a lot of departments, it's kind of justified why they are there. When we look at HR, when we look at, purchasing or other departments, legal departments, the PMO needs to justify its presence because they need to adapt, they need to continuously make sure that they provide that value. What is the one thing that you would recommend the PMOs to stop doing? Maybe because it's really not helping them provide that value.
Mm-hmm. Actually, just to answer that question about PMOs, I was thinking sometimes people call PMOs a function, but if you look in the operational world, that you don't get rid of the finance or you don't get rid of the marketing department, they always exist. But PMOs do come and go. So is it really a function? I think that PMOs can actually change organizational structures for the future if we discover and invent it. And I think it will actually reflect into the operational side. And this is some of the things that we're actually researching into. So what is the thing that PMOs should stop doing? They should stop measuring things by, say, success by activity. Focus on influence, focus on outcomes, focus on stakeholder perception, and also look at what's coming your way, such as the things about artificial intelligence and all the things that come with that. Try to understand the implications and change before you have to change. That's important. And sometimes it takes a leap of it does take a leap of courage to go and do that. So that's what I would suggest you look at. Oh, the other one as well is that what advice would you give to a PMO leader? Just to add to it, I was just thinking of like a tagline adding to this. So in the future, you want to really think like the strategists, so the guys in the strategy side. You want to act like consultants. So really provide very good advice and actually understand the frameworks and approach and how you solve problems. You want to deliver like an operator, I guess. And the relevance comes from the range that you do, from going from the strategist to actually delivering like an operator. So this is what I would make sure. Don't just think I just do this and I don't do something else. You've got to be flexible. You've got to adapt. And you show success in those different levels, you will have a long-term career in that organization.
Across all your answers, I'm thinking, I mean, the people. It's all about the people who are leading the PMO. There's a lot. I mean, you can give them frameworks, methodologies, a lot of things, but if they don't have that good analytical thinking, judgment, being able to shape the PMO to what it should be, I think we're gonna always have that gap. So it goes back to the people and their capabilities. And I think it stands out from all your answers. And I think it's really important for the PMO leaders to focus on that, because you can give them everything, you can give them a lot of tools, but if they don't know how to adjust and adapt, I think we're gonna always have this gap. So thank you very much for your answers so far on this technical side of the PMO, the future of the PMO, and what you're doing in terms of research. We can wrap up with a few quick fire questions so our audience can get to know you a little bit better. So I would like to start with a quick one: research, teaching, or consulting? Your favorite hat to wear?
I hate that question.
I think I know the answer, but I'll leave it to you.
Well, at first you got to understand, and then you got to disseminate. Or you could actually say you got to understand, and then you got to apply it, and then you got to teach it. So which one do I like to wear? I don't know. I'm probably more consulting. It's like where theory gets tested and lives, if you do a good job, they're changed. But I do need to have the other ones before that.
I would have said research myself, but I like consulting too. One academic concept that deserves more attention in boardrooms. When we look at the boardrooms, what can we do there?
It actually reminds me of the organization that you and I worked for a bit of time. I remember when they're looking at principal risks. This principal risk actually is a term that doesn't come from construction, it comes from the asset management side. And what they were showing was like 15 risks. And I remember one of them, they were saying, okay, for implementation, we have high risk threshold, but when it comes to reputational risk, low. But then I thought, well, wait a minute, if you fail on your implementation of this mega project, what's the impact on reputation? They're actually linked, and they weren't linking it. The problem is that the top management often just think linear. They just think of individual boxes. You've got to look at systems thinking, cause and effect. I think that's what they need to actually consider is what are the consequences, because we do live in a complex system and there are cause and effects everywhere. And if the understanding is brought to them and they understand the causality, I think they can make much better decisions as a consequence of it.
I don't think we talk enough about system thinking. We don't teach it enough. So I think this is one of the key things that needs to be spread more. So I totally agree with you. And in terms of the legacy you would hope AIPMO will leave on the profession, what kind of legacy would you imagine?
Yeah, I mean, it's AIPMO. If I wanted to be rich, I wouldn't have sort of worked with AIPMO. And I mean, what I didn't say at the time is that when I was working for this big insurance company in Switzerland, things weren't going well. The CEO and CFO were incredible pressure. It's one of the biggest in the world, and they committed suicide.
Oh.
And it was very sad because I knew both of them. And it's just because the fact that the projects and programs and what the advice they were giving wasn't optimal. And that's part of the motivation for doing it. Frustration, I used that word before. I think it's for really teams. I love working in high-performing teams. You know, when I worked at McKinsey, I worked at Logica, for example. I've worked in other teams. You know, when it works well, you have the confidence. You enjoy what you're doing because you're building. I'm an engineer. I love building things. I hate when companies fail because you have to take them apart. So I'm hoping that everything that we do, the people we motivate, and I know we motivate a lot of people, and they come back and give us feedback in how they apply things. They want to go and learn more. You know, we have people that go through the different levels of courses, up to the PhD level as well. Is that everybody's on a journey of understanding, and also a journey of impact. So I'm hoping that continues with this philosophy. Not money, because we don't charge, we don't have a membership, but really knowledge and understanding. And people get excited about discovering new things, seeing new perspectives, and helping others actually progress. Perhaps it's naive, but that's something that I've always enjoyed, and I hope that continues as a legacy of AIPMO.
I think it's noble. It's not naive at all. And maybe I'm thinking to change the title of this episode to Journey of Understanding, because I think we have to start with understanding things. So thank you very much for your message. And if people would like to connect with you, with your work and AIPMO's latest development, can you let them know how they can reach out to you?
Yeah, so I mean, LinkedIn, you'll find me on there. So I always respond back to people's messages. Courses, if you come on the course, we actually do something unique where we're so confident with the methodology and frameworks, we actually do real problem solving with the people that attend. So you'll spend 40 hours or more with me and also with other competent people. I don't really have that much time for conferences. I do a few because they're so busy in other things. Events that we do, or if you want to do your master's, we're going to create a new one probably next year. If you're doing a doctorate, then if I'm your supervisor, you have the unfortunate pleasure of spending about 2 years with me. Typically, we spend about a month to 2 months full time for any student because it's over a 3-year period. So connecting wise, emails, AIPMO, and LinkedIn are the sort of best ways to get to me.
Dr. Robert, thank you so much for this fascinating conversation. I got to know a little bit more about you, and I'm sure our audience. Your work reminds us that excellence isn't just about results. It's about the systems, leadership, the thinking and understanding that's behind system that helps us sustain impact over time. And I think there's a lot of understanding, more understanding that we need to do. Thank you very much. And I'll give you the space if you'd like to say a word before we wrap up our session.
Yes, I mean, thank you for asking me for this. In fact, when you asked me, I was thinking about what questions are you going to ask, and I know that you are well known internationally for operational excellence, and throughout this interview, I was thinking all the things that we're actually doing is if we can embed more operational excellence into PMOs, it will make all the difference in project success. So I thank you for investing your time and the interest in the PMO side. And I think there's a very close link and correlation between the two, the PMO part as well as operational excellence.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for this comment. And yesterday we were in a meeting and we were discussing the lack of alignment sometimes and the silos we create by separating everything in the organization under different departments. A lot of things has to be across, a lot of things they have to provide alignment rather than silos in organization. And I think this is where excellence, operational excellence, continuous improvement, all of these things help laying a good foundation for that. So thank you very much again for sharing your insights with us. And to our listeners, I would ask you, what role will your PMO play in shaping the future? Think about it, its future and the future of the organization. And until next time, stay curious and tune in to our next episodes on the Excellence Podcast. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you, Nancy.